Last Christmas, I went to Bangkok with my parents. There, I visited the Arts and Cultural Center, and to my pleasant surprise, there was an exhibition of LGBT plus exposure in Southeast Asia. I am the kind of person who can spend a whole day at an exhibition or a museum, just wandering around and gazing at the works. So, as always, I was taking my time looking at the smallest details of every single piece while my dad stood off to the side on his phone and my mom insisted I hurried up. After I was finally satisfied, we headed out of the exhibition. That was when my mom told me that while she understands the struggles of gays, she didn't think that activism was necessary. Okay. I hadn't really had any conversations about the LGBT plus community with my parents before this, but from my observations, they appeared to be okayly chill about it. Since their attitude towards the community was not hostile, I assumed that they would naturally support LGBT plus activism like I would, but that was not the case, apparently. It was then that it occurred to me that I may have been taking my perceived acceptance towards the community for granted, that even opinions from my parents were surprising to me. For a large part of my life, I was under the naive impression that society is naturally accepting of LGBT plus people. For me, the first time I was properly introduced to the concept of LGBT plus was through, BuzzFeed. Through videos that kind of look like this. My initial perception of the LGBT plus community almost solely came from these videos, and I genuinely enjoyed watching them. They presented me with this idea of a utopian world where it is already perfectly normalized to have different sexual orientations and gender identities. Due to this, I viewed LGBT plus as a topic that was not divisive. I thought that everyone was just as accepting as those in the YouTube videos. This worldview of mine shattered one day when I posted something related to LGBT plus activism on a Chinese social media app, and someone commented this. That was when I began to really experience some opinions from those who are outrightly homophobic. I was appalled. These opinions actually existed? I argued with the commenter for days, even wrote a whole essay rebutting his points, including research and even citations. In the end, I realized that he was only arguing for the sake of creating conflict and would not consider a word I said, and we both gave up. That was when it struck me that outside of this bubble of comfort that the YouTube algorithms have built for me, feeding me video after video of contents that I would want to watch. Outside of the virtual social media where companies would change their logos for Pride Month. Outside of the diverse, all-accepting, free-to-love world I wish I could live in, there is actually so much hostility that I had not known of. I discovered that there are so many more people than I thought who call LGBT plus people sick, tell them to die, and physically harm them. If even I myself, who is interested in LGBT plus topics, could have such a skewed perception of the reality that this community faces, how do people who are even less exposed to the community perceive the reality of LGBT plus issues? After visiting the LGBT plus exhibition in Bangkok, I started having more discussions with my mom about LGBT plus issues. She explained that she believes there is no need to specifically advocate for this community because tolerance would naturally increase as society as a whole becomes more open-minded. Plus, there are groups who are even more disadvantaged who would need advocacy instead. I have also seen opinions from the internet where people don't understand the need of a movement. They see the discussion of intimate information that, in their opinion, should remain personal, and might not understand why the LGBT plus community may feel that it is important to make a big commotion just about their identity. It is true that today, many societies around the world are more tolerant towards the LGBT plus community than ever before. However, despite the community gaining more exposure, many desperate issues that LGBT plus people in the world today face are still under-addressed. So, how could we present a more realistic portrayal of the nuances of the struggles LGBT+ people face? Firstly, depending on varying cultures and histories of different places, the experiences of LGBT+ people are going to be drastically different. The most influential representation of the LGBT+ community, which is from the liberal Western media, is not a portrait of every LGBT+ person in the world. For example, I know an openly gay Chinese celebrity, Jiang Sida, who says that he does not support gay marriage in China. His reasoning is that it is too idealistic and not applicable in a Chinese society, as the tolerance rate is definitely not sufficient for this change. If put through a Western lens, this opinion would be quite controversial. I realized that, despite my first impression of him being that he dresses flamboyantly and is open about his sexuality, he does not quite fit into my preconceived stereotype I got from the Western media of what someone who identifies as he does would think and act. I expected the right way of advocacy was to loudly and proudly fight for same-sex marriage rights, anti-discrimination laws, and destigmatization of being LGBT+. But Jiang Sida's opinions stood out to me. I started questioning whether I was also fitting people into boxes based on the media I consumed. In reality, it is completely reasonable for a Chinese person to not be advocating for the legalization of gay marriage. The attitude of the Chinese government makes it clear that they would not consider it at all, given how it controls the media and forbids the airing of homosexual content on TV. Furthermore, bounded by the overall lack of acceptance of the general population, legalizing gay marriage would not solve the problem, as regardless if they could get married or not, homosexual individuals may still be disowned and ostracized from their community. The cultural and political atmosphere in China is different from the West, thus leading to the attitudes of the Chinese communities differing from the Western ones. So not all the arguments would work the same way. The traditional Chinese values focus heavily on the sacrifice of one's own pleasure for the bigger family. So I would not expect explanations like, "That's who we are," would convince your Agong and Apo very well. Taken to the more extreme, in countries such as Russia and some others in Eurasia, the term LGBT is associated with Western colonialism and is seen as something toxic that is going to eat away their culture. Being anti-LGBT is associated with nationalism, according to an essay published by Humanity in Action. The author, Karl Roerich, suggested that international advocates should cooperate with local LGBT+ people and adapt to their local values, instead of enforcing the Western ideals. That is why, instead of copying the Western narrative and the progression of LGBT+ rights throughout the globe, I think that the tactics and arguments used by the activists and supporters of the LGBT+ community should learn to evolve following the cultural and political climate of that region. My second point is that because a majority of the content from YouTube, Instagram, films, and other media are created for entertainment, not journalism, many people may be overlooking certain struggles that the LGBT+ community is facing. Have you ever heard the questions? Why is being LGBT+ such a big deal? Do we still need to fight for LGBT+ equality? With more and more coverage about the LGBT+ community in Western mainstream media, I find it wonderful that the increasing representation of LGBT+ people in media is raising more awareness. We come across them in films or books, like Simon from Love, Simon, a teenager who was outed by one of his schoolmates, but was eventually able to get together with a boy he likes, and was accepted by his family and friends. But we also have to keep in mind that a lot of the time, we choose to consume the parts of media that reflect our values and beliefs, ignoring those that might make us uncomfortable. Think about it. Out of all the fictional scenarios of coming out that you have read or watched, were there characters who were completely rejected by their loved ones, or never able to come to terms with themselves? The popular shows are popular because they give people what they want to see, a happy ending. we generally would not actively seek to see something that makes us feel sad. As a result, there might be an overemphasis on a positive and inclusive part of society, but a lacking depiction of the rejection and discrimination one might face, leading to the risk that it doesn't give voice to the real-life struggles of those in the LGBT+ community. When I was at Cornell Summer College this summer, I studied international human rights. For one of my projects, I looked into conversion therapies under medical settings in China. In 2017, Human Rights Watch interviewed 14 victims of the conversion therapy who were all forcibly sent to medical institutions by their family, including one as young as 15. Even transgender individuals were diagnosed as homosexual and put through the same torture. This is how one of the victims have described the experience. During the treatment, they were injected with unknown medicine and went through electrotherapy, where they were electroshocked while being forced to watch homosexual content, forcing them to associate attraction toward the same gender with pain and disgust. A number of them tried to run away, but were captured by the medical institutions and forcibly brought back. And it made me wonder, this seems like a very serious issue. Why do people not know about this? I have never heard about it before either. After researching, I realized that there are actually people, such as lawyers and content creators online, who are trying to fight against conversion therapy and bring the subject into public attention, such as this one, by in-town video that is uploaded on YouTube. Unfortunately, their efforts might not be influential enough to raise more people's awareness of the situation. In my class at Cornell, I met a friend who was also Chinese and also interested in LGBT+ related issues. When I asked her if she had known about the conversion therapies, it turned out that she actually had no idea about them. It seemed to me that even the supporters of the LGBT+ community and advocates of equal rights are not fully aware of the darker sides of our society. I also remember the shock I felt when I learned that Russia enacted a law that bans telling minors that homosexuality is normal. According to a survey conducted by the All-Russian Center of the Study of Public Opinion in 2013, when the law was passed, at least 90% of the surveyees were in favor of the law. Imagine being gay or bisexual, feeling like you're abnormal, and even if you try to reach for help, your family, your teachers, and even the psychiatrists are banned from telling you that it's okay to feel attraction towards someone the same gender as you. I wish I was more aware of what these people are facing. A lot of us have realized that with globalization and the internet, opinions are getting increasingly polarized. While we are able to meet people from all around the world who share the same ideology as we do, those in opposition are also going through the same process. Even within our own communities, there are many conflicting norms and beliefs, especially between generations, that could be further polarized without proper communication. My third point is that we should involve the older generation into the conversation more, as reaching a common consensus between generations can be difficult. For example, when I asked my grandma what she thinks about transgender people, she simply responded by sternly telling incomprehensible. Only by understanding their reluctance to accept can we truly understand what is needed to establish an environment where LGBT+ people can live without the discrimination and judgment from society. In a street interview by Out China LGBT Stories, some elders expressed their disapproval for a trans woman in their neighborhood, claiming she was abnormal. But the interviewer also approached this lady who worked as a shoe cleaner, and she has friends that are gay and is supportive of homosexuality and same-sex marriage. From the interviews, I could tell that the elders who are personally close with gays or lesbians are a lot more accepting than those who are not, showing how exposure can help to humanize those whom they may view as weird and different, making them more willing to accept. That is why I think we should make a greater effort to involve older generations into the conversation instead of simply dismissing their opinions as outdated. Many people can agree that the portrayal of LGBT plus individuals in mainstream media is crucial for proper representation. But I also believe that alongside the empowering messages and positive efforts to normalize different sexual orientations and gender identities, we are still at a stage where it is essential to address the very real struggles and discriminations the community faces. Certain arguments that have been used to increase tolerance and inclusivity of the LGBT plus community in one culture might not be able to be applied cross-culturally. And through the echo chamber of the internet, many conservative ideas are hidden from the liberal but less informed individuals, like how I used to be. This, as a result, makes even some of the supporters of the LGBT plus community hold certain distorted understandings of the struggles the community is facing. This extends beyond the LGBT plus topic, and we should always keep in mind that what we consume might not be applicable to real life, and sometimes being flexible in the forms of activism and being aware of the nuances in the ways injustice presents itself could be more effective to promote social changes. If we recognize that there is still a lot of hostility and struggles experienced by our fellow humans and work hard to make the situation better, then perhaps the accepting and free world will become a reality. Thank you.